Hello, I am Riley Wilson, and welcome to the Band of One podcast. This podcast is created to help anyone that wants to be a more successful solo performer or become a solo performer and avoid a lot of the pratfalls and mistakes myself and some of my contemporaries have made. I have over 50 years of live performance experience. We'll also include tips from other top pros worldwide who've done the exact same thing in their regions. My desire is to make this actionable as well as entertaining. If you like what we do, subscribe and don't forget to share it. Let's get busy. Today I have an old friend who has everything to do with me being in Texas for the last 26 years, who's also a great guitar player, a great singer, and a great performer that I've learned a lot of stuff from over the years. My guest today is Mr. Yancey Stevens. Yancey, let's talk about you and kind of your backstory. First of all, what got you mixed up with the guitar in the first place?
Well, when I was very young in high school, my brother was playing a trumpet, actually a cornet is what it was. And so I picked it up and started playing that. He was in the high school band and I was in elementary school in the fourth grade, I believe it was. And so I had to take the cornet to elementary school and play with the elementary school beginners band. We would meet every day and practice with the high school band director. He came over there for about an hour and played with the young children, taught us how to play the instrument. But every day I would forget to put the cornet into his car. He would drive back to the high school across town, and my brother would be without a cornet to play in the high school band because it was sitting at the elementary school. So one day the band director had a bright idea to loan me a euphonium, which is a big horn, sounds like a trombone. And I'd already learned treble clef, so he gave me euphonium treble clef music, and I started playing that. And he also said my embouchure was correct for the euphonium. So I started playing that, and I just loved it. And the next thing I knew, I was breezing through all the music he could give me and leaving all the other elementary school children in the dust. He told me that I was way accelerated beyond them, so he wanted me to play in the fifth grade with the high school band.
Wow.
So every day they would let me out of elementary school at about 10 till 2, and I would drive my bicycle across town and meet at the high school and practice with the high school band. So I was in elementary school, but also in high school at the same time, and it made me kind of a star of the elementary school. I just fell in love with music then, and they showed me off whenever we had football games and stuff because I was the littlest guy in the band playing the biggest horn except for the sousaphone. But I played a big horn, and I was a little guy. And then we wound up winning all our competitions and traveling around the state, just made lots of money. We didn't travel to anywhere on school buses. We rented trailway buses.
Wow. By the way, where is this? This is not here in Texas.
No, it's South Carolina.
Okay, where in South Carolina?
The town I was in was Loris, South Carolina. And we wound up going to the 1964 and 1965 World's Fair. And we also played at Carnegie Hall for what was called an evening with the corps. It was drum and bugle corps. And what this band director did, he was a drum and bugle corps Marine instructor, Marine drill sergeant. And he loved drum and bugle corps, so he bought these bugles, and he made our high school band double as a drum and bugle corps, and we were the only one in the world. So every year they had this show at Carnegie Hall called An Evening with the Corps, and they invited us for 2 years in a row to open the show. Well, I was just a kid. I think I was like in the sixth grade at the time. So I was looking at it like a child, really. It was just, hey, it's fun to travel around. But I did get to go to the World's Fair back then, and that was very exciting because a lot of the exhibits that were at the World's Fair back in 1964 and 65 wound up being exhibits at Disney World and Disneyland. Because I went to Disney World and Disneyland, and I saw the same exhibits there, the same rides, you might say. It was very nice, and gave me a vision of what you could do playing music, and how much fun it could be.
Well, you certainly didn't miss out on the fun part of it, but here's the question. How did a guy that started off on cornet and then went to euphonium end up being a guitar player singer?
2 words, the Beatles.
Indeed.
I saw the Beatles having all these girls chasing them. By this time, I had got to be a fairly good musician, and I had Silvertone guitar, acoustic guitar that my brother was given for Christmas, and he never played it. He couldn't do anything with it. But I saw the Beatles, and I said, well, I got to figure out how to do that because I want girls chasing me, you know?
By the way, as another kid from the 60s and 70s like yourself, so did I. I think that's universal. I'm going to ask how many of the vets like yourself and myself that have been doing this for many years, how many of people, was it the Beatles? I know Steve Lukather of Toto said that was a big influence on him and a lot of other guitar players as well. So
there's no doubt. There's no doubt. They influenced so many people, and then it made us grow our hair long and just change the way we thought about things. And but I learned a few chords, and then I had a friend move into town who his father played the guitar. He was pretty good, and he had like a K guitar, which is still a cheap guitar, but he had a K electric guitar, and I'd never played an electric. I would go over there, and I'd get his father to play for us, and then my friend could play because his father taught him, and I would go over to their house. I just, anytime I got out of school or didn't have anything to do, I was over there. My friend's name was Jerry Martin. His father played some of the old jazz standards and things like that. The first song that he taught me was It's Just a Shanty in Old Shanty Town. I remember I still play that occasionally, and not very many people know it, but it's a strange song, and I learned that one. But I can remember Jerry would not be home, and I'd go over there to see him. His mother would only be there. The father was gone off to work, Jerry's somewhere else, and just his mother would be there. Her name was Nettie. And I'd knock on the door, and I'd say, Miss Nettie, is Jerry here? And she'd say, no, he's not here. And I'd stand there looking bewildered, and I'd say, Miss Nettie, can I come in and play his guitar? And she would laugh and let me come in. She basically adopted me and Jerry would come home a lot of times. I'd be in there playing his guitar.
Wow.
So I eventually figured I couldn't keep doing that. I went to the Piggly Wiggly, got a job as a bag boy, making $1.15 an hour. And I saved my money, and I went to Austin Graham's hardware store in my hometown of Loris, and he had a Kent guitar and a Winston amplifier. I used to call that my cigarette package because it was a Kent guitar and a Winston amplifier. The Kent guitar was $60, and the Winston amplifier was $40. Very cheap instrument and amplifier, but I laid those things away and paid for them while I was working at the Piggly Wiggly. I finally got them paid for, and they were mine. I could take them home, and I did. And the next thing I knew, I had learned enough songs, and I learned a lot of rhythm and blues in South Carolina. Next thing I knew, I started going out and trying to play with people. And the little town I'm from is a tobacco market town. Loris, South Carolina is it was a tobacco market, no longer. But they had 3 tobacco warehouses with auctions, and the town was pretty much half black, half white. Well, all the musicians were black. So I wound up playing with black musicians back then before there was any civil rights laws. My dad was open-minded enough to let me do that. You know, there was a lot of prejudice back there in the deep South, but he let me go and play music as much as I wanted. And I would go down into this section of the town in Loris that they called the Bottom. They had 2 sections. The Hill was the section where the black residential section and the black business section was called the Bottom. And they actually had some juke joints down there. Well, I went down there and started playing with the black musicians in these juke joints. And I was underage. I was 14 years old, you know. But I learned how to play the Drifters and the Temptations and the Tams and the Four Tops, Garnet Mims and the Enchanters. I could go on naming them. There's so many old R&B groups I learned how to play their tunes, and still play them to this day.
You know, it's interesting because my background wasn't different. I moved to North Carolina in April of '71, a sophomore in high school. And a little over 2 years later, I find myself playing with a group called the Men of Distinction. This would have been the fall of 73. And their music was exactly what you're talking about, which they call in the Southeast beach music.
That's right.
And it's not the Beach Boys, and it's not, what you would think on the West Coast, the Ventures. It's basically these obscure R&B groups that would play at the Carolinas and Virginia and Georgia in the summer, and that's what was called beach music. How old were you when you started playing these places, Yance?
About 14.
Wow. So in other words, you're a working musician of one sort or other from what, fifth grade?
Yes, I was playing I was underage playing in these bars. As a matter of fact, I visited home not too long ago and took one of my friends and took him out to an area west of Loris on Highway 9 called Green Sea. They have a high school, and they did have a post office back then. And we went to the place where I played my first gig, and it was a rectangular cinder block building. It was just a black juke joint is what it was. There was no whites that went there except for me. And they had a door at one end next to the bar and a door at the other end that was kind of in the middle of the end where the people came in and out. And the bar was two barrels with two 2x12s sitting on the barrels, and behind it was an old Coke cooler that you lifted the lid up, and they just had beer and wine in there. And I remember playing that, and they made me wear a fedora and a sports coat, and I was 14 because I was way underage. I wasn't supposed to be in there. And the black guy who ran the place, he made me, whenever they took a break, I had to go sit in this chair behind the bar in the corner because he was afraid that the police would come in. And if they did come in, I was supposed to walk out the door.
Wow.
But they never came in. They basically left places like that alone.
So what led you to Texas?
Well, after playing for many years down in the Myrtle Beach area, just traveling around the Carolinas, Georgia, went all the way down to Florida, and up to Virginia, up the eastern seaboard, you might say, playing all the way in to as far as into Tennessee and stuff like that. I played the R&B and for a while, and then I started when the Beatles came out. I got into the more heavier side of music and the rock and roll, and started emulating bands like Steppenwolf, and really got into Yes and played a lot of Yes, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple. And the harder, kind of simpler, harder acts like Foghat and Bad Company and stuff like that. We started traveling around and was playing a lot of rock and roll. Was actually getting to where, the girls did sort of chase us. We weren't stars, but, they'd come out where we're playing. And so I was getting to where I wanted to be. But then I realized that I didn't know very much about music. I knew how to read better than the other guys in the band, but I didn't know that much about music. And I used to ask questions all the time. I'd say, why does G go to C and then C go to D? I would ask questions like that, and nobody would give me answers. And then I remember I went into a music store in Myrtle Beach and started taking guitar lessons a little bit. And the guy who ran the store, he played some jazz, and he taught me jazz chords. And when that happened, I started saying, well, I want to learn theory. I wanted to learn music theory. So I started asking around, and I said, where's the best place I can go? I was wondering where was a college that I could learn music theory and how to get better and within the realms of rock and roll. Well, nothing like that existed. And I was quickly told that you need to go to Berkeley, which was in Boston. So I started looking at going to Berkeley. I actually was getting very close to signing up to go, and then people started saying, well, if you go there, you're going to be a fish out of water because you're a Southern boy with a Southern drawl, and you're going to be up in a northern city, and they're going to rob you and beat you up and everything. So somebody said, you need to go somewhere in the South. So I said, where's a place like Berkeley in the South? They said, University of Miami. And so Miami did have a jazz program. And I thought, well, jazz is, rock and roll came out of jazz, I believe, a little bit. In my mind, I legitimized it, just said rock and roll must have come out of jazz, maybe some country, I don't know, but I legitimized it. And I said, well, I'm going to go to Miami. And I started checking into that, and it was way more than I can afford.
Yeah, Miami's a private school. A lot of people don't know that. They had a great jazz scene. Pat Metheny was there, and of course, Jaco Pastorius, but it's a very pricey place to go. You're right.
I couldn't afford it. I started checking the prices, and just the prices of rental of apartments and stuff was way beyond my means. And I was going to coastal Carolina in Conway, which is close to Loris. And I was taking a music appreciation class out there. And I told everybody while I was going, I said, I want to go somewhere where I can study music. And someone said, there's a gentleman out here that teaches classical guitar. His name was Tom Johnson. They said, go talk to him. He knows something about music schools. And I went and talked to him, told him everything I just told you. And I said, I need to go somewhere that I can afford that's in the South. He said, well, I went to North Texas State University in Denton, Texas. And he said that the gentleman who started the guitar program at Berkeley is from Denton, Texas. And his name was Jack Peterson. And he said he is actually at North Texas State teaching guitar there. And North Texas State had just won a Grammy for the best school jazz album or something like that for their 1 o'clock lab band. And so I looked into going there, contacted them, got the information, and signed up there, was accepted. And next thing I knew, I had my van all packed up, and I was on the way to Denton, Texas to enroll at North Texas State University, which is now University of North Texas. They've changed their name since then.
Yeah, it's become a huge school. So here's a quick question. When was this that you're finally at Denton?
I went in 1979. I drove out in August of 1979 and started school.
Okay.
That's when Denton became my new home. And I just recently looking at my life, and I'm amazed. You don't really think about it, but I had lived about half of my life in Texas, which kind of blew my mind when I had not thought about it because time flies,
It did. So you obviously went to school and studied jazz. And after you graduated, what became next? Did you start off working as a solo performer, or were you doing gigs with bands, or both, or what?
No. I was always in a band. I never knew how to do solo. Solo became later as I was working and gravitated towards. I put together a little rockabilly R&B trio out in Texas, and then we started traveling around. We actually came back to Myrtle Beach, and we had 2 years in a row. We had contract in Myrtle Beach. One was from Easter to Labor Day, and the other one was just the whole month of July. The first one, the Easter to Labor Day, was at Myrtle Beach Resorts, which is down between Myrtle Beach and Surfside. And the second was at Ocean Annie's, which is up next to the Briarcliff Acre. Both places I played with my trio. I realized that the trio was real easy to book and travel with. That's the reason I did that, is guitar, bass, and drums.
Yeah, smaller groups are much more mobile and mobile friendly than a larger group, right?
Right, they definitely are. And that's the whole reason I could fit 3 people in a van and pull a trailer. It was no problem carrying 3 people around. The money involved was easy, and plus you didn't have that much trouble getting them together for rehearsal. But then I started, whenever I came back, I noticed that there was really a lot of bars in the North Texas area, and I was getting burnt out on traveling all over the place. That trio, we went all over the Southeast and also out into New Mexico and up into Oklahoma and Colorado, Arkansas, but, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina. We were doing a lot of traveling across the South. When I came back, I was looking at all the availability of work in the North Texas area But I noticed that the bands were like 5, 6, and 7-piece country bands. And I decided I wanted to give that a shot, and I got into that. I actually got a lot of work doing that, and that's when I met you. You came and sat in with us out down in Midlothian.
Yep, that would have been April of '96, sure was.
Right,
And that was your band, the City Slickers, right?
right, and that's the group that I did an album in 1975 and got to go to Sendai, Japan to do a Back to the Country, headlined a concert over there, which I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand how I could be a headliner. But, I guess they just, I don't know, they did some kind of promotional thing and made it seem like I was a big star, but I wasn't.
Well, here's the thing, and I learned this not only from you, but our late friend Kim O'Connor, and that is a recording can go anywhere.
That's true.
And a recording, when it goes anywhere, it's kind of like turned out to the universe, and you don't know what happens. I remember, I think he had played in Spain. Didn't you do something like that as well?
Kim, he's dead and gone, so we can't ask him, but he did a lot of things like that. He traveled around quite a bit, and he wrote songs that Johnny Paycheck recorded and, some other notables recorded. But I'm not sure where all he went. But he is the reason I started playing solo.
Well, he was a big influence, I think, on both of us, his what he used to call modern singing cowboy music.
Right.
And Kim was a great guy, and he had several CDs, recordings out, and wrote his own material. And I know, again, as I said when I met you, you had just released the album Circulate.
Right.
As I said, it sounded like myself, you were not only doing band gigs, but you were doing solo shows. And I guess what was the inspiration for doing that besides Kim O'Connor doing it?
Well, while I was doing the band gigs, he would come and watch us, and we became good friends, And he kept asking me over and over he said, I've got more work than I can do. I've got a lot of overflow, and I'm giving it to people that can't really do it. And he said, you would be really good at this, what I do. He said, you got the right look and everything. He said, you could do it. And I'd say, well, what do I need to do? And he would say, well, you need to do like Back in the Saddle and Home on the Range and El Paso, the cowboy songs. I said, I don't know any of those, Kim. I do all this radio country. He said, some of it, you can do some of the radio country, but you need to do the kind of old, what I would call the old crusty cowboy music. And I'd always turn him down because, I thought, well, it just is a lot of work for a little bit of reward. And I just kept turning him down. And then finally one day he came up to me, he says, I've got a job at the Hilton in Grapevine at Austin Ranch, which was behind the Hilton in Grapevine. And he said, all they want is Garth Brooks and George Jones and George Strait and Alan Jackson, all the songs you do. And he said, if you can do that on acoustic guitar, you can do this job real easy. He had asked me so many times, I said, okay, I'll do it. I did. That's all I did. I just said, I'll do it, And so I said, when is it? And I went and did it. And he said, you only got to play an hour. And so I went and played an hour at the Austin Ranch in Grapevine. And I got through, and the guy came up and said, thank you very much. We enjoyed you. And he handed me a check. And the check was for $300, which is not a great amount, but it was more than I got playing in the bars and at the time. And so I thought, well, I must need to give some of this to Kim. And so I called Kim up and I said, they gave me this check for $300. How much do I need to give you? And he said, no, that's yours. And I said, well, this is all mine? He said, yeah, that's yours. He said, you covered that gig for me. That's yours. And I said, do all of them pay this? And he said, yeah. And he said, that's kind of a minimum. He says, as a matter of fact, if you're going to do these, you can't charge less than that. And I said, all of them pay this. Kim, I need you to meet me at the White Elephant Saloon tomorrow. I'll buy you all the beer you can drink. Bring your song list. And so he did, and I wrote down his song list, and we went over what I need to know for the singing cowboy, and I just went home and started working on it, and I combined it with playing with the band. And then it seemed like when I did that at the time, it just kicked my income into high gear, which I really appreciated from him.
Well, yeah, let's mention that for a moment, because I think almost everybody, and that's the main reason I do it, is that playing solo can be very lucrative if you know what you're doing, if you're good at what you do, and you're able to connect with audiences, all of which you have, all of which Kim had. I have been able to be fortunate to do the same thing. It pays incredibly well.
Well, it just you don't really think about it, but you don't have to divide the money.
So let me ask a question. At some point, did you start phasing out or just not booking the band stuff as much and go exclusively solo, or do you still do some band gigs as well?
I phased out the band. It became where it was just so much easier to go and play by myself and not have to worry about rehearsing people and getting them all together. And I will say it's much more fun and satisfying, I guess, musically, to play with a few other musicians, because, it sounds better and, you enjoy the company and all that. But when I started doing the solo thing, what got me was I didn't need to carry an amplifier. I didn't need to carry anything but a guitar and a case. And I started playing harmonica along with that. I'd get the harmonica holder like Neil Young and put it on and play the harmonica and the guitar. And I started using my feet kind of as rhythm, like on 1 and 3 or 2 and 4 on a song,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would cut a lot of jokes, like you say. You learn you get a stable of standard jokes that you say over and over. If somebody watches you 4 or 5 times, they're going to hear the same jokes over and over. But, the new people who've never seen you, it's new to them. So I did that, and it got to where I became the resident cowboy at South Fork Ranch over in Parker.
You got very successful doing that, pal, and I again, kudos to you for doing that. By the way, for those folks that aren't from the Dallas-Fort Worth area or too young to remember, Parker Ranch was where the television show Dallas was shot for over a decade, and that was a huge, huge tourist draw. It's still a cool place, and that obviously is a King Biscuit gig, I would call it, because that's a great gig. But you had dozens of places like that you played, didn't you? My interview with Yancey had to be cut short just to fit it in the length of the time of this podcast. So we'll do another one coming up very shortly. You've been listening to the Band of One podcast. I am Riley Wilson, and thanks for joining us. If you have ideas for upcoming episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch with us at your convenience. You can also contact me directly through my webpage at www.guitarmadesimpler.com. See you next time.